My name's Adam Hanlon. I'm the editor of Wetpixel, and I'd like to introduce you to our regular contributor, Alex Mustard. Hi, Alex.
Hi, Adam. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. So Alex and I thought that we would reminisce a bit on this, and we've decided that we're going to create 2 episodes basically devoted to our cameras that we've used over our shooting careers, I suppose, our shooting history. And for better or for worse, I've elected to go first. So I thought I would start off by saying that, well, again, I started on film, which for some of the audience probably is a bit of a, I don't know if it's a surprise or not. I suppose I probably look like I started on film, but certainly the early days of film, and my first underwater camera was a camera called a Nikon S5. Anyone who's probably been involved in underwater imagery for a while will have memories of it. It was a film. It was a film camera designed by Nikon to use underwater, and there were various versions of it. And mine was one of the later versions, Nikon S5.
It was an orange one or a green one?
It was an orange one, actually. Yeah.
No, the proper. That's the way to go, I think.
Yeah, and I didn't at the time. I didn't have the money for all the accessories, so I had pretty basic setup on it with the. I think it's 15mm, isn't it? It's the.
Well, that's the expensive bit, the 15mm.
Yeah, it was the 15mm I had. I did have the expensive, but I didn't have anything else, pretty much.
Okay.
And I ended up buying a strobe right at the end of it. Yeah, and I shot that for a few years in South Africa, growing up in South Africa. And at the time, interestingly enough, I mean, there were so few people shooting underwater that there were sort of 7 or 8 people producing images underwater in South Africa in those days. I mean, that wasn't down to the fact; it was just that there was so few people taking cameras underwater. So that was my first venture into, and I have very fond memories of sending off spools of slide film and them all coming back and then being underexposed, overexposed, or out of focus, or and from
nothing changes, Adam.
No, that's true. Yeah, I just don't have to send the film away anymore. I moved off. Then I was lent actually, and I used for quite a long time a CNC Motor Marine. I think mine was Motor Marine 2 actually, but anyway, Motor Marine, and that was a bright yellow, again, dedicated underwater camera. It was sort of CNC's answer to the Nikonus, although to be honest, I didn't ever think it was quite as good as the Nikonus. But it did have accessory lenses, and this was quite an interesting thing in that I had an accessory wide-angle lens that I could add to a wet lens. Which was at the time was a bit of a departure, and it had a dedicated strobe. CNC strobe that came with it, and again that was I guess I was shooting that, put it on timescale. I was probably shooting that in the some mid-90s, I guess, and that was now based in the UK and shooting it mostly on holiday, places like Egypt, really. And then, as happened to all of us, the digital thing came along, and I was persuaded it into getting a compact camera, and my first compact camera was a camera called a Ricoh Caplio RR33, catchy title, and it was a compact camera with a housing, polycarbonate housing. It was a Ricoh housing, I think, and again I didn't have any accessories for it, but it was actually a really good little camera. I think it was 8 megapixels, 9 megapixels, something like that.
It's quite meaty.
Yeah, it was a bit of a beast at the time. And it suddenly opened up this whole idea of being able to review images underwater. It produced some pretty great results. For shooting both in the UK and abroad, but it didn't have any accessory lenses. I didn't have a strobe for it, so it was a fairly basic kind of, I guess, point and shoot. But it got some great results. I did some really nice stuff with some model shots, for example, in the Red Sea, and it was a at the time it was a really good camera. And then sort of my big breakthrough into digital came along in the probably early 2000s when I got a camera called Olympus SP350. Again, it was a compact camera, but uniquely, and still to today, probably somewhat uniquely, is it had the option of shooting in RAW. So it was an Olympus RAW, and it had full manual control of exposure. And this at the time was quite revolutionary in that the majority of compact cameras were very much designed to be easy to shoot and tended to simplify. And for some reason, Olympus decided with this camera to add both the option of shooting in RAW and and to have manual exposure control. And that really that's what made me start thinking about digital as a serious option for underwater shooting. Having those controls made a big difference.
I think it was also that Olympus were doing really well with those polycarbonate housings at the time, selling a lot. And I think it made them actually pay a little bit of attention to what underwater photographers want, which is so often that manual and that raw. And yeah, I remember how valuable those, you know, things like the 40-40 and the 50-50 were in that period, and how, you know, the Wetpixel forums were full of those cameras and people, you know, really using those Olympuses. And then kind of Canon took the baton on from them a little bit. But when they started their PowerShot series, kind of, you know, kind of took it on from there, really.
And the other thing that happened with this was Inon were on the scene. So I had accessory lenses, so wet accessory lenses, a wet wide angle. I think I had a wet fisheye actually, and wet macro lenses. And people like Heinrich Weitkamp had produced a TTL converter, so that allowed you to basically take external strobes with using the Olympus housing. It was an add-on that you get onto the housing. So you ended up building a bit of an ecosystem of gear around this fairly solid kind of compact. And that, again, I mean, that we look back at it now and it seems, oh wow, so what? But actually at the time that was quite new. That was quite I didn't know anyone else that was using wet lenses at that time. So it was quite an exciting kind of innovation. Anyway, that was, I think, the compact cameras. So they sadly, Olympus's next model, the 550, they actually took the manual exposure control off it. So it sort of ended there with as far as I was concerned. And I was offered a very good deal on a completely different camera, which was a Nikon D2XS.
The slippery slope.
So suddenly everything got a lot more expensive. It was in a very nice Subel housing, and in fact, I was bought it off the Wetpixel forum. There you go. And that was the beginning of the end, and I've not had any money or any time since. But the and obviously the D2XS was it wasn't the first Nikon Pro digital camera, but it's probably was the first that had got most of the bugs wrinkled out, ironed out. So it was a really great camera, and obviously full-fledged SLR, and because it was a Nikon, obviously the infrastructure developed. So the 16mm 105, the fisheyes, it was a crop sensor camera, so I had a 1017 with it, and domes, and from that's sort of where the whole SLR thing came from, I think. It still is, I think, in my hand, not necessarily in the housing, it still was one of the nicest feeling cameras that I think I've ever had. It had this sort of hand grip on it. It was very much a kind of pro body. But where it suffered from a bit, it suffered particularly from high ISO performance. Anything much over 400 ISO was pretty much unusable. And we're scrolling forward a bit now. So my next camera again was a Nikon SLR, which was the D7000. Again, a crop sensor camera, and in many ways it was a consumer camera rather than a pro camera. And I remember, I know you had one, Alex, or so you had more than one, I think. And I remember looking at yours being stuck together with bits of duct tape to keep the battery compartment on. And mine certainly was the same by the end of it. And I think one of the things that kind of taught me was that there's a reason why these pro bodies are called pro bodies, in that they are that much more robust. They seem to be able to cope with the things we do to them somewhat better. One of the nice things about the D7000 is it did have video. That was the first Nikon camera I had that you could shoot video with, which was a new tool. And in fact, I remember Nautica coming out with the video-specific version of the housing, the D7000, I think NA D7000V. So they actually came out with a version of the housing of the D7000 housing specifically for video, which was again, at the time, a fairly unique thing.
And what housing did you have for that?
I had Nauticam for that. I had Nauticam D7000. And in fact, I had the D7000, the sort of Mark I housing, which was the non-video version. And then they later on upgraded it to the video version. So I had D7000, original NA D7000V. And again, obviously, the nice thing about going from D2XS to D7000 was that my lenses, and so initially I had adapters, so I had Suval ports, and I had adapters that allowed me to adapt my Suval ports onto my Nauticam housing. So initially it was just a question of moving the housing over, and obviously the lenses I had from the D2XS. So it was a relatively seamless move from one to the other.
So where did you move next?
So then Nikon kind of threw a big spanner in the works by introducing the D800. So I shot D7000, and I, for quite a long time, actually had felt that I preferred crop sensor cameras for underwater. I'm primarily an underwater shooter, so my major use of my cameras has always been underwater. But in part because by that stage I was the editor of Wetpixel and was fairly heavily involved in Wetpixel, and obviously this suddenly new 36 megapixel camera was very kind of new, very kind of exciting, and I felt that I had a sort of professional obligation to get one underwater and shoot it. And if my memory serves me right, I think we were the first people to take one underwater and actually get pictures underwater. I think you had an early D800, didn't you, Alex? Didn't you have prototype D800?
Predrag, who is a professional photographer, but quite often enjoys coming on my workshop trips.
Yep.
He is Nikon sponsored, and we actually had a D800 2 or 3 months before it was announced on a workshop.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was it was amazing. I have to say I think probably the D800 is the biggest hype and excitement around a camera introduction that I can remember.
Yeah. I remember there was a thread on the forum about it that went to 27,000 views or some crazy number of views.
Yeah.
People just it was such a departure. For a long time people had said, well, resolution is dead, and suddenly it wasn't. Alex is having camera problems. It must be a Nikon problem.
Yeah, it is a Nikon problem. And I don't know why it is. So maybe just cut for a sec there, and I'll get back to you.
Yeah, I'll pause it there. Hi, Alex, you back?
Yeah, back again.
Good, yeah.
I'm actually really interested to ask you why you went 800, 810, because for a lot of people it was just a version of the same camera, but I'm pretty sure for you it wasn't.
Yeah, I really like the D810. There was the issues with the D800 I thought were it was very much Nikon's first attempt at high resolution full frame cameras, and I didn't think the image quality was okay. It was excellent, but the things like the dynamic range I thought was okay again, but not brilliant, and the autofocus wasn't brilliant. And the D810, I think they'd sorted some of those wrinkles out. I think as much as anything, it was probably really a firmware incremental update rather than a hardware. I mean, obviously the D810 had a different sensor, but it was the D8. I thought the D810 was really what the D800 should have been, but they had to get something out in the market. And I had two. I
think Nikon have done that a lot actually down their history. Yeah. Cameras like the D90X was a completely F90X film camera was a completely different beast to the F90.
Yeah. And
I remember when that was the most popular underwater camera. Yeah. The X was everything, and the F90 was piece of junk.
Yeah, yeah. And that's certainly. I mean, I had two D810 bodies actually, and I used those a lot. And I actually thought that was a really good camera. And then I kind of resigned myself to the fact that full frame was going to be my future forever, because they didn't release a D400. The D300 was getting pretty old at that point, so I was kind of like, okay, well that's it. Then I'm just going to have to do full frame, and I was kind of okay with that. Really, I'd made my peace with it, and then they went. Then they went and did the D500.
Yeah. Just sweet little camera, though.
Oh, and we've had this discussion before. It's a fantastic camera, and it is still my favourite underwater camera. We've had a long list of cameras here, and they've all had pros and cons. But the D500 for me ticks all the boxes.
Having the first one I shot was yours, actually.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
We borrowed it in Lembe.
Yeah. And that was again that was the first. I think that was the first time anyone had got one underwater. I had it in Indonesia for a month. I had it for 2 weeks on Damai in Rajarampat, and then Lembe 4. I think that was a 2-week
Actually, I've
trip.
got a completely random bone to pick with you about this.
Oh yeah.
You must have added Raja Ampat somewhere in the keywording in the camera. Because the pictures I took in Lembe of your with that D500 of yours, they come up if you search Raja Ampat on my website.
That's from Lembe.
They come up. I don't know. There's Raja Ampat in there somewhere.
And when was this? This was in 2018. No, 2016.
I don't know. But yeah, if you search Raja Ampat on my website, you get these 4 random Lembe shots taken with your camera on D500.
Yeah, sorry. So anyway, so D500, great camera, and then obviously history repeats itself, because having resigned myself to the fact that I didn't need to buy another full frame camera, the D850 happened. And I mean, the D850 is well, it's an amazing camera. For me, it doesn't replace the D500 underwater. I'd still rather shoot D500 underwater for most things, not for everything. But it is just, it's an amazing all-round camera, and I really can't see any way of calling fault for it. And that really kind of brings me full circle. That's the full story from. So ironically, Nikon S5 all the way through to D850 is I don't know, 30, 40 years of Nikon there. It's scary, really, and 30 years anyway. And
you look good on it, Adam. You look good on it.
Yeah, and thank you. And it, you know, and it's something that certainly I have shot other brands. I've shot other models of camera. I do own a couple of other cameras, but not as my primary cameras. But I do seem to keep always coming back to Nikon, and that's, you know, I get maybe it's more gut than more heart than head, but that's the way it is. So.
Wallet as well. You know, switching brands all the time is not very sensible.
Yeah.
You know, even if one has an advantage for a small time, it's usually caught up again pretty quickly.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, I went through times, for example, with fisheye lenses on full frame, you know, where I really wanted that I really liked the Canon 8-15. I shot it quite a lot on a Canon body that I was lent. I really liked it. And I was almost kind of like, oh, you know, but then fortunately Nikon brought out their 8-15, which took that particular economic disaster away from me, which was good. Fantastic.
Yeah. Great stuff.
So that was part 1, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to return very shortly with part 2, which will be Alex's camera history, which will probably be considerably longer than mine, I would guess, which is a bit of a scary prospect. So
I'll have to rush through them, yeah.
Yeah, you will. So thank you for listening, and thank you, Alex, for listening. I love talking cameras. So. Yeah. It's a good thing to do. I'm going to say goodbye to Alex and goodbye to everybody, to thank Reef Photo and Video very much for sponsoring this episode, and to say that if you enjoyed it, please like it, and if you have any suggestions for future episodes, please feel free to add them to the suggestion box, and please tune back in very shortly for part 2, where we'll run through Alex's camera history. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.